Welcome to our first Life Course Centre seminar for 2024. Let me just take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we're all meeting and acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. And we want to pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. And we recognise their very valuable contributions to Australian society. So I think everybody knows who I am. I'm Janine Baxter, and I'm coming to you from Turrbal and Yagara land up here in Brisbane. As I said, this is our first seminar for the year. We're having a hybrid seminar this time. There's a bunch of us online and also people in person in the room at Melbourne. I wanted to introduce Dr. Barbara Broadway, who is our new seminar coordinator for the year. Thank you very much, Barbara, for taking on the role. And also to thank Rennie Lee and Nancy Conn, who were our seminar coordinators last year and the year before, who did a great job. But thank you to Barbara for taking it on for this year. The seminars are a really important way for us all to come together, and they play a really important role in connecting us across the 4 universities that we're based at. So looking forward to this year's seminar series. And it's great to have Ariel Kalil here kicking off the seminars for 2024. So I just wanted to say hi, thank you to Barbara and everybody, and I'll hand over now to Barbara, who's going to introduce Ariel, not I.
Thank you, Janine. Hello everyone. I just wanted to say in general about the seminar series going forward. Like Janine just said, I will be coordinating that this year. If you have anyone visiting you who you think would be a great speaker for the rest of the center to hear, please let me know. If you have any thoughts or ideas on topics you'd like to have covered, again, please send me a message. And then I'd like to introduce Ariel. I think probably want to come in front of the camera. Ariel is a professor at Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago, where she directs the Center for Human Potential in Public Policy and also co-directs the Behavioral Insights and Parenting Lab. She's also an adjunct professor at Norwegian School of Economics and long-term friend of the Life Course Center. She's an associate investigator now in this version of the Life Course Center, and has been visiting and participating in the center from the start. Ariel is a developmental psychologist with extensive research on the role that economic conditions play in shaping parenting and child development, and has recently done a lot of work on income-based differences in parenting behavior, how they've changed over time, and how that contributes to children's cognitive and non-cognitive skills. And today she's going to talk to us about raising futures, narrow the child skill gap for the modern economy. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everybody. Oh, so nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's just an absolute honor and pleasure to be here. It's very special to be a part of the Life Course Center. And as Janine reminded me, it's been some time since I've been a friend of yours, and it's just it's a real honor, truly. So thank you for inviting me, and also so many special thanks to all the people who organized my visit. I'm on my grand tour. I guess maybe I'm the gray nomad doing my lap around Australia, but I'm going to be visiting all the different nodes of the Life Course Center. So I get to meet you first. And I'm super excited to then do Perth and Brisbane and Canberra and Sydney. So there's many people. I can't see you on the Zoom, but I'm excited to meet you in person over the next 2 weeks. So thank you so much. Ordinarily, I would take questions. You could interrupt me, but I will do it in a way that facilitates the people on Zoom, since I can't see them and it could quickly get out of control. So I'll just talk. And this is going to be a sort of overview, high level, not super technical talk about the work we do at my research lab, which is the Behavioral Insights and Parenting Lab. And I hope you get a flavor of what we do and what we're interested in and how we go about doing our work. This is a research lab that I co-founded and I co-run, and we've been at this particular kind of work for about 10 years now. So maybe Janine can relate, but to me, it seems like finally after 10 years, you feel you might have something coherent to say about all the moving parts. So that's the purpose of this talk. So here's a couple figures that motivate the work we do. I doubt this will come as any surprise to anybody here on the Zoom. We are interested in the fact that gaps in children's cognitive skills are evident by family background. Here we're looking at gaps by mother's education, that the gap in cognitive skills, whereby children of highly educated or economically advantaged parents have higher levels of skill in all sorts of domain, cognitive, emotional, health skill. The point is that this gap opens up as early as you, in whatever field you're in, can reliably measure it. So in developmental psychology or health or economics, we can see that this gap opens up far before, at least in the US, most children are in any kind of formal schooling environment. And furthermore, that the gap closes relatively little over the course of children's schooling years, which is not to say that absent high quality schooling, it wouldn't grow even larger, but that we can't, the punchline here is that we can't imagine that this gap is somehow going to be closed by virtue of children's exposure to school. All this is leading up to my main thesis, which is that parents in the home environment matter. That's where we're going. And when we think about, again, I have a kind of a US-centric approach, sorry, but I think there's going to be some overlaps. When we think about how shall we close these gaps, I'm going to say super, super briefly, and I could spend, a lot of time debating these 2 points with you, I'm sure, that in the US, we have, I would say, 2 go-to policies. We think on the one hand that we can have preschool. So there, at least in the US, we might wait until children reach age 3. And age 3, we might imagine that we're going to send them to some theoretically high quality out-of-home learning environment. And that exposure to that kind of environment during ages 3 and 4 is going to close those gaps. Our other policy, we're not very generous in the US in terms of unconditional cash transfers. But we certainly have a lot of academic discussion about whether just transferring income to families would be the right thing to do to close these skill gaps. And again, this is subject to a lot of nuance and a lot of debate, but I'm simply going to say that there isn't a lot of evidence that either one of these approaches is going to make a very big difference. Okay, I don't have a lot of time to talk about all the reasons why, but we have a super important brand new research study in the US called the Baby's First Years. It's the first large scale, unconditional cash transfer, randomized control trial evaluating everything that might happen in families from birth of the child in terms of family behavior, parent investments, employment behavior of parents, and most importantly, skill development of children. And the results, I would say, have not been super promising. It's a policy relevant amount of money that's being transferred to low-income families from the birth of their child. These kids have now been followed for 5 years, and there's very few treatment impacts on any outcome of interest. So again, I'm going to set these 2 approaches aside for the moment. And I'm going to argue, and this is maybe, again, something I don't really have to argue to you, but I'm going to argue that the reason that in particular schooling is not going to narrow those child skill gaps is that, especially at younger ages, the number of hours that children spend in the company of their parents or in environments selected by their parents is far greater than the number of hours that children are going to spend in formal school environments. So if we're just thinking about where are children and under whose influence are children developing, I'm going to say we have to think about parents. As far as, this is why we sort of argue that schooling is not the silver bullet, as far as why income transfers are not the magic answer we're looking for. I'm simply going to say, in the words of my co-founder and co-director, Susan Mayer, there's a lot of things that money can't buy, which is her very well-known book. So thinking now, let's turn our attention to the home environment and what are parents doing in the home environment. And here we can see, this is just from American Time Use Survey data, nationally representative ongoing time diary survey that we have, just like the one you have here in Australia, I think. We can see here that parents from different backgrounds spend their time differently with their children. So college-educated mothers spend more time with their young children in particular on the things we think of as important inputs into child skill development. Now, I haven't cluttered up the slides here with a whole bunch of asterisks. These are all significant differences. And you might look at this and say, well, this is a day. This is just any given day. You know, how these differences maybe aren't very big. This is just one day, and these daily differences add up. So over the course of children's early childhood, a 10-minute difference in play, which we think of as a critical input into children's skill development, if you think this one day is representative of all days, will add up to a meaningful amount of time. So again, in any time diary from any Western country, we can see these differences by family background in the kinds of parental investments that parents make in their kids' skill development. This is really just a stylized fact. So this is all the motivation. So my big question is why? I've been working for 25 years on why. Why is this so? What drives these differences by family background, and what can we do about it? Again, in the last 10 years, under the auspices of our research lab, we have become quite interested in how to change behaviors in the home environment, how to shift what parents do in order to close those gaps in early childhood skill development. And of course, if you want to change or shift what parents do, you have to understand what lies at the root of the differences, really what drives parental decision making. And maybe you can get a clue because we named our research lab the Behavioral Insights in Parenting Lab. We've been especially inspired by all the work in behavioral economics, and we have, Richard Thaler across the street at the business school. And we have been interested in applying those principles to the study of parenting. In other words, saying that parenting is a long slog of decision making. And there's a lot of decisions you might make every day. There's some decisions you only make once, but at the end of the day, parents decide how they're going to spend their time, money, affection, and all the other things that go into child skill development. Why do they make those decisions, and what kind of driving factors in the social context drive the decisions parents make? And if we find differences in those drivers, if we find that there are big differences in decision-making, how might we prompt some parents to make different decisions? And there's various routes to that. So that's really what I'm going to spend most time talking about today. So we ask ourselves, why do advantaged parents in the US spend less time and less developmentally, we'll say, stimulating time with their kids? There's some answers you might just produce off the top of your head. We tested and we rejected a lot of the usual suspects. So we have tested what seem like very plausible explanations that low-income parents have more life stress, and that life stress shapes decision-making in ways that are suboptimal for child development. We have tested and found little evidence for the idea that low-income parents expect a lower return on their time with their child and therefore invest less time. We have tested and roundly rejected that low-income parents enjoy to a lesser extent the time they spend with their children. In fact, they enjoy to a significantly greater extent the time that they do spend with their kids relative to their economically advantaged counterparts. So I'm just going to say we've got some usual suspects. We've looked at them all. We don't find a lot of support to them. And what we focus on instead are what I'm just going to call an umbrella. I'm just going to say cognitive roadblocks. And I'm going to call these behavioral biases, beliefs, preferences, some notions of identity, essentially factors drawn from really social psychology, also economics, also developmental psychology, my own field, about what are the things that shape how you feel and what you do. And we're interested in how much those things matter and whether they're manipulable. And then critically, from an intervention perspective, how much would it cost to shift them to such an extent that they shifted kids' skill development? So this is not just an academic exercise for us. We are doing a lot of field experiments, as you'll see in a moment, and we are in Chicago and in the state of Illinois talking to various policy actors about whether what we find can actually make a difference and be scaled up and things like that. So that's where we are and that's what we do. And I'm going to now turn to, again, just an overview of what we have found out. Okay, so we have found, so we do, as I say, we mostly do field experiments now. We mostly do large-scale field experiments with each one. We're now up to about 1,000. We're getting bigger and bigger every year. But as you know, this is intensive and expensive to run a big field experiment. But we also do a lot of survey work when we're running these experiments. So we certainly find that college-educated mothers have more of the characteristics that boost their time investment in children. So this figure shows us the things of which college educators have a greater amount that are also significantly correlated in a descriptive survey sense with time investment on a weekly basis. So, it's certainly no surprise that college-educated mothers are more advantaged on demographic characteristics that matter. So they have more income, they're more likely to be employed, they live in a two-parent family. Their expectations are uniformly higher. Everybody has high expectations, I should say. But the college-educated are really topping out at the ceiling, okay? But there's nonetheless a significant gap by family background. I'm just going to point out a few of the things that were more surprising to us and are particularly interesting to us. College-educated parents are more likely to say that the key thing that matters for their children's school readiness is to be curious, whereas less educated parents are far more likely to say it's important for my children to know how to count to 50 and to know the ABCs, which is really unfortunate because those kind of rote accomplishments are the very things that children are going to do. In fact, they're going to do in preschool and then they're going to do it all over again in kindergarten. So of all the things that would be important for parents to do at home, those kind of learning the alphabet and learning how to count to 20 are the least important. These sort of open-ended curiosity, exploration, complex thinking are the very things that low-income kids are not going to get in their schooling environments. Ergo, we think the most important for them to get at the home environment. Okay, moving over on the right side of the figure, there are a number of things that we're going to put under this bucket of cognitive barriers that college-educated parents have less of. So they report less difficulty paying attention. They're less likely to have a fixed mindset, that is to believe that children's skills are determined at birth and impermeable to change. The psychological sense of not having enough to make ends meet is less common, not surprisingly, among the college-educated. They also report less of, we're just going to say, sort of psychological characteristics, like saying I have little interest in doing things, or I have little self-efficacy, that is, I have little control over things. Now, interestingly, these two at the bottom, when we ask parents the question, how stressful is your life right now? College-educated parents have a significantly higher score. They're much more likely to say that their life is stressful, and they're much less likely to say that they enjoy doing learning activities with their children. So yet they do much more anyway. So this is a kind of an interesting puzzle. It may be that these things arise from doing too much. Maybe it is, they're probably diminishing returns to spending developmental time with your 2-year-old. So I don't know which way the causal arrow goes here, but this is interesting. So my point here is that some of these are all correlated with time use. Again, in this big survey of 2,000 families we did. I can't say anything about causality, but what I can say is that certain of these things I could imagine manipulating, and others of these I would have no control. So I can't make somebody be in a two-parent family, but I might be able to manipulate a growth mindset, which is the opposite of a fixed mindset. I might be able to make parents think differently about children's skill development. It's possible that I can improve attention and help parents gain more focus. It's possible that I could make them feel more self-efficacy. All that is to say, maybe possible and a lot cheaper. And that's really where we're going with this. Okay, so I'm going to tell you results from 3 different ideas that we've looked at in the lab. 3 different constructs that all fall under this bucket of cognitive biases and beliefs. And again, this is all in the service of our identifying those barriers and seeing if, so that's not me, right? It's not part of my obligation. Gonna send me down to Central. Okay, I think I go here. All right. So again, it's all part of identifying what these behavioral barriers are, seeing if they're manipulable through as low cost and light touch an intervention as possible, and seeing how much it matters. So I'm going to tell you, as I say, in order here, about 3 different kinds of studies that we've done. Managing present bias, thinking about identity, parental identity, and managing parents' overconfidence, which is sort of the plague of all parenting, is that all parents think their child is well above average. So okay, this is going to take just a tiny bit of explaining here. Here, I'm just showing you some treatment impacts. These I'm going to tell you what the intervention was. So we've done now 3 different studies to manage parents' present bias, by which I mean parents' tendency to procrastinate, parents' tendency to tell us, I really enjoy reading with my child. I have books in the home. I know that reading is important, and I believe if I read, my child will have higher literacy skills. So we have a lot of parents who say all that to us and yet don't read, okay? And our view is that, like many things, this thing that you really aspire to do and believe in your heart of heart, is important, might better be done tomorrow than tonight. And then all these tomorrows add up to, fewer minutes of the very thing that you pledged you wanted to do. So we've done several different field experiments where we're trying to manage parents' present bias. And what we do in those interventions is we have a notion that we're just going to bring the future to the present a little bit to get you to do the thing you said you wanted to do. And how do we do that? We rely a lot on technology and SMS interaction with parents, mostly to remind parents to do the thing they said they wanted to do. That's the idea you can have in mind. We ask parents to set goals for reading in the week or 2 ahead. We use technology to give parents actual feedback on the amount of time they did read and to encourage them to actually make a new goal. We remind parents of the goal they set, and we congratulate them when they meet their goal. And again, I don't have time to go into all the details, but most of that is living in, it's all technology based. We never actually see parents mostly when we do this. We see them to recruit them into the study, but we cut out the middle person. Okay, so and so what I'm going to tell you is through those various means, usually these are packages. We haven't done a whole lot where we've unbundled. Each of those elements of the treatment, by the way, is just super cheap. So we just want to know at the outset, if we just put that all together in a kind of kitchen sink procrastination managing approach, can we get you to change your behavior? And the answer is yes. These are 3 different treatment effects on parental behavior for interventions that ran for different lengths of time. And we have looked at engagement in math, which actually our parents self-reports. And we've looked at reading minutes, which are objective measures of reading, which we collect because we actually have a digital library that we created that lives on a tablet, and it records the parent-child reading time. So we have an objective measure of that type of parental investment. And I'm simply going to just get you to look at these size, the magnitude of these treatment impacts, and tell you that I think they're not nothing. I mean, they are, whether they would persist after the intervention is a huge question for which we do not have the answer, but I'm going to tell you at least at the end of the treatment period, which varies here from 3 months to 6 weeks to 45 weeks. That was a COVID-induced elongation of our study. We are finding statistically, economically meaningful treatment effects on these parent engagement measures. And I'm going to tell you that I think we're finding meaningful treatment impacts on kids' skills. So these, again, are treatment effects on kid outcomes from the different studies that we've done. We did one study on boosting attendance. We did another study, again, on math, and then this SELF is a literacy score. So not only do we have treatment impacts on the parent investment measures, but again, we have, 15, 20, almost 25% of a standard deviation treatment effect on a child's skill is in the running with the large scale kinds of interventions that we would have in the US, even interventions like a preschool intervention for which, kids go for a whole year or two to preschool. We can't really move kids' math skills more than 20% of a standard deviation doing that. So I would like to believe that what we're doing here is plausible. And mostly, as I said, because it's super cheap. Like, this is what we're doing here, sending you text messages for 3 months to, with a few other things is not expensive. And again, we're really in the running here with the treatment effects. So we've had some very interesting results on this notion of, we think that just like everything else for parents, there's a gap between wanting and doing. Just like exercise or eating healthfully or saving for retirement, you should do it. You know how to do it. Parents don't need to be taught how to read. Low-income parents have books in their home. They don't have as many books as do high-income parents, but very rarely do they have no books. Again, this is in the US context. This is not covering, and I should say that really, for practical reasons, we recruit our families through subsidized childcare centers, which is going to be super not representative of the whole population of low-income families in the US, because half of low-income families in the US don't go to preschool at all, but we don't know a super practical alternative way to find them. So that's a limitation of our work. So let me just say that. Okay. I'm going to turn now to the second idea that we talked about, or that I showed you, which is about identity. So we know that identity drives behavior. Nobody knows this more than marketers. If I make you feel a certain way, make you feel like a certain kind of person, you will make one decision versus another. You will buy one good versus another. So what I can show you here, this is also coming from our survey work, that parents have different, people also, by the way, have multiple identities. I might have a different identity sitting here right now than I will later on in the day or with some other social group. Parents hold multiple identities. This is a survey of about 2,000, again, parents of 5-year-olds. And you can see that the college-educated parents more strongly endorse a couple of these identities for not surprising reasons. They more strongly relate to the idea of being a working professional and being a partner or a spouse because they're more likely to be working and to be married. College-educated parents are less likely to feel that they are a member of a community and that they're a member of a group of friends. That's sort of interesting. But what's most interesting to us here is that overall, all parents, with no difference across groups, report strongly relating to the notion of being a parent on a typical weekday night. Okay, so we're starting with the fact that all parents have a very strong identity of their role as a parent. Despite the fact that that is the strongest of all the identities to which people adhere, there are nonetheless still differences. Again, this is a bit complicated. Let me just explain it. These are correlational. This first slide is going to show you some correlations. What we're going to see here is the correlation between feeling that strong identity as a parent and time investment. So on a survey, we ask parents, again, how strongly do you adhere to this identity? And we ask them the amount of time that they spend with their children in learning activities in a given week. And what we can find here is that among the less educated and the more educated alike, having a stronger sense of a parental identity is more positively correlated with time investment. Okay, so that's just all you need to know. So having this strong parental identity is not only typical, but it also at least appears to drive, I can't say causally, parental investment. So that seems like has a lot of face validity. But of course, we want to know if this is causal. And I'm going to tell you about a study that one of my PhD students did, which I just thought was the cleverest thing I ever heard of. So I told you about all these studies that we've done, these large-scale field experiments. I mean, I got to show you, 2 histograms that represents like 8 years worth of work. And we, of course, compensate parents for their time. So parents who participate in our surveys and our interventions get a gift card. They get a cash card that they can redeem like at Amazon or something else, right? It's like a $50 gift card. So what we found, you don't have to look at the slide right now because I have to explain to you what this is. So we discovered, kind of surprisingly, that there were all these unclaimed gift cards from all of our studies, and they were just out there in the cloud. And it was actually thousands and thousands of dollars from our perspective, because over many of these studies. And it was really perplexing. And I should also say that the IRB wouldn't let us take the money back. They said, you've given the money out, theoretically, it doesn't matter to us that it's just living out there in the cloud, but there's nothing you can do. So my wonderful PhD student, Noah Liu, said, it's a perfect time for an experiment. And so what we did was we messaged families. So we still had all their contact information. And we did a messaging experiment whereby we just had a control group who got the message, by the way, you have an unclaimed gift card. And the treatment group got the messages that said, you have an unclaimed gift card. You can use it to buy something for your child. And here are the results. So what you can see here is that after 4 weeks of such messaging, I think we sent 1 message per week with these different flavors of messages. The messages invoking the parental identity increased the cash gift card redemption by 50%. So a really large amount, which we take as pretty interesting evidence that that message is doing something. Is make, the prompt or to get them to think about their child is making them more likely to cash in that gift card. And here, this is back to non-experiment. So that was an experiment. This is back to non-experimental, but we can see that we also shifted how parents are spending their money. So we can see, not to a super great extent, but we can see how those cash gift cards, where they're being redeemed. And we have maybe a hint, oops, what just happened? I touched, oh, there we go. We have maybe a hint of evidence that the parent identity recipients increase their redemption at retail and e-commerce sites and decrease slightly, dining and food services. So it's possible that they shifted their consumption towards something that might have been, an actual item for a child. We can't know that for sure, but this is just a hint and, bolsters our interest and I think the face validity of the idea that identity really matters. And to the extent that you can shift identity as parents are making decisions about parental investments is a possibly quite plausible way to think about intervention. Okay, and then finally, of the 3 things that I told you about, this is just going to be descriptive. We don't have the experiment on this yet. I'm going to say that this is 100% inspired by Nico's work with Deb Cobb-Clark, which we read and loved. And it's really about what are the information to which parents have access, and how does parents' information about where their kids are in an absolute or relative sense drives the investments that they make. So you can't really see the title of the slide, but I'm going to tell you. Okay, so here this comes from our survey. We have parents on the left-hand side of the figure who do not have a college degree. We have parents on the right-hand side who do. And we ask parents where they think their child ranks in the skill distribution here in math skill. And these are all kids whom we've tested with a valid and reliable test of math skill. These all come from the baseline of our math intervention survey. So we just have a really nice descriptive fact showing how do parents' perceptions stack up relative to kids' actual skill level. And what you can see, I mean, the driving, I think the most important fact here is that among the less educated, they are far more likely to overestimate their kids' math skill. Some get it just about right. I mean, this is basically, are you in the right decile? That's the definition. And that means if you are, then you're in the ballpark and we say you're correct. And then either you are an over or an underestimator. Interestingly, college educated parents are about equally likely to both over and underestimate. But we think that overestimating is going to drive underinvestment. So we're pretty worried about the overestimators. So let me just see what's the next thing. I'll just say this and then I'll say one more thing. Parents also, these are only less educated parents. Less educated parents also vastly overestimate their child's curiosity. So we have both an overestimation of a kind of close-ended skill like math skill and a more open-ended skill like curiosity. So less educated parents are really not having a very good understanding of where their kids actually rank. And we have been inspired by these descriptive facts. So we have a grant proposal that's being reviewed now that's going to be an information treatment. And it's going to give parents, we are partners with a large network of charter schools in Chicago where we have access to the standardized test scores that the kids take. We're going to do an information treatment where there's a big discussion in the US right now, maybe also in Australia, about the merit of standardized tests and big debate about whether they're meritorious or not. But what we do know is that especially less educated parents don't really consume that information even when it's sent home. Actually, the information can be really hard to get. It lives in some portal that needs 10 passwords to get to. And then you get the thing and it's like your child's rank and you probably just throw it away. So we're going to do an information treatment where we not only hope that we will accurately convey to parents where their child ranks on standardized tests of math and literacy. We're going to have also a second treatment arm that's going to provide some guides on we think this is going to be a negative information shock for many parents, and we're going to try to then present parents with some help and support and guidelines for how they might invest in their kids. And we're going to do a randomized controlled trial and see if that boosts skill development. And we're going to have all this beautiful administrative data from the schools, which we're super excited about. So that's that. And I'm wrapping up now. I'm going to take 5 more minutes. Okay. And this is sort of builds on everything I just said, but gives you, I'm just going to open another window for you of something else that we're very interested in our lab. We are, for reasons I may have alluded to, very interested in technology. And not how can technology substitute for parent effort, but how technology can complement parents' effort. I'm not super interested in just replacing parents with a parent robot, which exists, by the way, but rather, I'm interested in parents engaging with their kids, and parents want to, by the way, as I said, when we interview parents with more limited education, they tell us that the time they spend with their child is their favorite time of the day. They far more enjoy it than do their college-educated peers. And so we just want to make it easy. We want to reduce frictions to parent investment in kids' skill development. We want to capitalize on the fact that they like to do it. They tell us they find it meaningful and that it's a big part of their identity. And so you can't see my super clever title, which says that technology has improved life for generations in meaningful ways. And how can we think about technology supporting parenting? Okay, so again, these are things, and the great merit of technology is that it's scalable and it's cheap. And so we are really on the opposite end of a spectrum of thinking that says you have to send a real person into somebody's home to help change how they parent. Let me just say, I think that's super important for a very specific group of parents. Those who have multiple needs, are extremely disadvantaged, will only benefit from an in-person interaction and really intense support. But in the US at the moment, that is our modal parenting intervention. Very high touch, very high cost, very expensive, and not apparently very well liked by its intended recipients, because most people who are even enrolled in such a program will drop out early and often. Huge rates of attrition from those kind of programs. So I'm just going to say that we are looking to, as I said before, how much can I, really rely on technology to replace that very expensive in-person component of supporting parental behavior. And, the things I've alluded to so far about these behavioral barriers that interest us, as it turns out, technology is well suited to managing many of them. Okay, so in our view, technology can, reduce those frictions to parent-child investment because it can manage parent procrastination. So we all have apps and things that beep at us and remind us to do things. And again, there are limits to all these things. You can't remind somebody, you can't send a reminder message, for the rest of your life to do something. The idea with all of these things is that they work to form habits, which we believe are the missing ingredient in many families, is just habits. Where do habits come from? I'm not really sure, but they can be formed and they can be sustained. And again, I think technology can fill a role in habit formation, in managing procrastination. Technology can provide parents feedback and give accurate information to which parents might not otherwise have. And again, that might be a negative surprise or a positive surprise, and that's something we have to be mindful of. Technology can strengthen parent identity. I think by helping people form habits, we can overcome this anxiety and self-efficacy problem. So none of us would maybe feel all that confident imagining we're going to run a marathon, but there is an app and there is a training thing. And lo and behold, one day we've run a 10K and then we, get on our way. Again, we just don't think of parenting as anything super different from all the decisions and habits and behaviors we engage in other realms of life. And then technology has this amazing quality that the content can constantly be refreshed. So a big problem with starting something is that it often becomes boring. So novelty is a big driver of behavior, and technology has the possibility of being fun. And parenting, should be fun at least part of the time. Okay, so I'm going to just show you, let's see, my title. I'm going to be super brief and just say that these are experimental effects. These are treatment effects of experiments in which we did a horse race between analog and digital materials for boosting kids' skill. So the bars on the left come from a experiment where we had a digital library versus not, for boosting children's reading skill. And the bars on the right show the difference between our giving parents high quality math apps that we vetted really carefully versus analog materials. And what we found is that for both of these things, the technology won out. Okay, so I'm just going to leave, that's just a fact that I'm going to move along here. But technology seems to win in at least a couple instances in our randomized control trials for boosting kids' skills. For the math, I'm going to give you some insight into why that might be true. So what we did here, this was not a field experiment, but rather a lab experiment where we brought parents and kids into our lab and we set them down either with analog math materials, like really nice Montessori wooden blocks and, beautiful things, manipulables, versus we gave them math apps on the tablet. We had them play for 10 minutes and we audio recorded the conversation that went on. And then we sent all those audio recordings. We did a machine learning approach to understanding what was said during those sessions. This is for math. And as you can see here, in the analog session, in the digital session, that is the session where parents and kids did math together for 10 minutes or so using these apps, kids heard more math talk. The sentiment of the whole session was more positive. The emotional valence of the interaction was more positive, and children heard more praise. And it's not because, I'm almost at my last slide. The reason that this is so is because the apps add on to what parents are doing. So the app does not crowd out what parents are saying or doing, but apps also talk. Apps say good job. Apps say happy words. And so basically this treatment effect arises because the app augments what the parents are doing. So children basically get a double bonus. They get the input from the parent and from the app itself. And we also know that parents actually enjoy using the apps too. So that's just a tiny little flavor of this technology seems to be attractive and beneficial. This gives you a little bit of insight into why that might be so. And this is a line of work that we're pursuing. What is this technology doing? I'm just going to say, like everything else, apps lose their luster. So this is just another, descriptive fact from a different research project we did. We can track the usage objectively, and like anything else, it's super fun initially, and then people stop using it. So that's a problem for everything that we have to solve. Technology is not a magic bullet for the fact that people do get bored. Okay, so this is the last slide, and I'll just summarize quickly. Again, just to give you a little bit of flavor of what we do. We're really, and I think we'll be doing this for a while, we're really focused on this question of beliefs and biases and how those things that are theoretically, I think, manipulable shape parent decisions and shape their decisions to make the investments that they make. We're very interested, as I alluded to, in the role of technology. How can technology reduce frictions to parental investment and engagement? How can we do all of this in a way that's cost effective and scalable? And I'm just going to end by saying, in order to do that, we really need the help of sort of government infrastructure, because there's really no way for us to reach families without, some institution to find them. And I'm just going to say, in the US, when we say, what is the State Department of Education? What they really should be called is the State Department of Schooling, because they are really not focused on children's learning outside of the school context. And we are really trying to, press to these, formal government channels that we need participation in children's learning and their education, and not just their schooling. We need infrastructure for support. We could do this. It is not hard to get technology to people, but it needs a kind of a reimagining of what the role of the federal government is. And so I think that's like the big policy puzzle that we're going to be working on for the next some years. And so that's all I have to say. We have had lots of funders whom I thank. I didn't leave so much time, but I left some time, and I'm going to have office meetings with lots of you, but maybe you will tell me what some questions are.
We have some questions in the chat. Maybe I'll start with one of them and then we take one from the room. The first question is from Janine, who's asking, is the evidence stronger for mothers than fathers? Using the term parents, but the sense is that it's really focused on mothers. Is that correct? And if so, is one of the implications that mothers just need to do more?
Thanks, Janine. Okay, so we are mostly working with low-income families in the US. When we go to those families and we ask, okay, when we find those families, I told you we find them at preschools. And so really we are relying on who's dropping the child off at preschool. And then we ask who's the primary caregiver of this child. And among these low-income families, that's almost by default going to be the mother. About 10% of the time, that's going to be a grandmother. So fathers are less often taking the child to preschool, so we just don't find them. And they are less often living or involved with the household. I would love, I'm interested in caregivers, and I'm interested in all the people who make investments in kids. I wouldn't want this just to be, here's something more that mothers should do. I would certainly want to make it easier for mothers to do what they want to do. But it's, we are driven by the practical fact that this is the caregiver whom we find when we need to recruit somebody into a study. But we absolutely, we think of the ecosystem of investors in child skill development. And in our work, that certainly involves fathers.
So the question is, what activities parents are not doing to increase their reading time?
So the denominator is super low. So it doesn't take much to get a big standard deviation impact. That's what I'm going to say. I think they're not substituting away from a whole lot, but we know how many minutes it is. I didn't have enough time to tell you. On average, the treatment group is reading like 6 minutes more most days. That's where, so I wouldn't say the time's really coming from anywhere.
Okay, then another question from the chat from Steffi. Who wonders whether you can say anything about parents who do not read to their child independent of which technology is available. Many parents might have reading difficulties or difficulty with math. They might feel uncomfortable or feel embarrassed. They couldn't read fluently to the child.
Right.
And if embarrassment is a strong motivation.
Right. So Steffi, when we had this digital library for our reading intervention, which we created, we made a digital library with 200 books, and we do all our work in Spanish and English in Chicago. We had picture books with no words, and we had more complex books with words, and parents could choose what they wanted to do. So I wouldn't exactly, maybe I shouldn't call it reading. I should call it time engaged with a book that you might just be talking about. Okay, so at least for our intervention, I don't think that, and sort of going back to thinking about the broader picture, what actually really does matter is that parents talk to their children. I don't think that the modality of having the talking be related to a book is as important as back and forth conversation and talking to children and eliciting their ideas and having open-ended conversation. Books help make that happen. But we have a completely different project where we're actually sending parents conversation prompts. We call it Chat to Learn. And this is a text messaging program where we're actually just trying to prompt conversation.
Okay, another question from you.
Did you guys play with the idea of gamification for parents and see whether that actually increases engagement in a more sustained way? Because I know that it works for a bunch of other things that are really bad behaviors.
Yeah, our reading intervention has a tiny slice of that. So when parents met their reading goal, there was a dancing bear that danced across the tablet and lighted up and was, there's a lot more we could do. Honestly, when we started that project 10 years ago, technology, now we're trying to use AI in an ethical and smart way to help, make these tech platforms even more effective. So we have certainly thought about that. Yeah. And we have illustrations now that come with our texts. So it's definitely multi-sensory.
Probably would relate to that. And also to Steffi's question earlier, Karen is asking, that there's a lesson learned from COVID that there's a tech divide. Some families
Right.
don't have access to
Yes.
online or just phone.
Yep.
And yeah.
I totally agree with that. We've thought about that a lot. The city of Chicago has attempted, they had a thing after COVID where they are trying to provide Wi-Fi to underserved areas from the city, but I don't disagree at all that if technology is going to work at all, the very first step is making sure that people have equitable access to it. Because right now, the people who have the most access to it are the people who need it the least, and the people who can stay on top of what is a high quality math app, because there are a lot of low quality math apps. And we spent lots and lots of time in our research lab trying to identify what is high quality and so forth. So I 100%, there are inequalities at every level. Technology is no different from any other thing that is inequitably distributed. It just happens that if we could figure out a way to make it be equitably distributed, it's a cheap, it wouldn't be that expensive to do. It's not sort of thinking about how can I would like to make schools equal. I would like to make teachers equal, but that's, a much harder question. So I don't disagree that the question of inequality is just as much a part of technology as it is anything else.
Thank you very much. I think we are at the end of time now. Maybe one last question, if there's a quick one. Yes, Sangeeta?
I was just wondering what the kind of policy program implications are of what you've described.
Yeah.
If you were to resource families more stimulated better, you talked a lot about technology, but you've also recognized that there's a significant resource deficit here.
Right.
So beyond technology, what kind of policies we should the disadvantage families?
I think it's really what I ended with, which is just the idea that at least in the US, Illinois State Board of Education kind of starts thinking about kids when they get to kindergarten, or now, when they get to preschool. We have efforts in Chicago for universal preschool and so forth. But, that's just a lot of years that children are not going to be in those institutions. There's a lot of time spent at the home environment. And I just think parents are paramount. And I think we don't do anything creative or sustainable to support their children's learning, which is just such a waste. So that's sort of the meta policy question that I'm super interested in.
That's a nice way to end it, I think. A recording of the seminar will be made available in the next few days. I'd like to thank everyone who joined online or in person for coming and for asking questions, and Caroline and Kate for organizing, and of course Ariel for giving a fantastic talk. As we mentioned before, Ariel will be visiting each node in the next 2 days, so if you are lucky and get a slot in to meet with her, contact the local node administrator. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you.